You deserved everything you got. This is a union city.
That is a Philadelphia tradition.
Seize the means of podcasting.
Oh God, the boss has crushed us.
Let me tell you one thing else.
In oldie-timey times,
Who said it? Kanye West or Thomas
we
Paine?
will not raw dog reality for that one.
The pleasure of the flesh is in solidarity.
The Scab Buster.
It's gonna be wholly unprofessional.
Keep together strong. Let that be your mantra.
Hello, 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 and welcome to the Labor John podcast, where we... John? That can't be right. That's not English. About the working class history of jolly old Philadelphia and the surrounding world, much of which we used to own, my country. And I'm the chief co-hostable, Sam James, and I'm joined by...
Gabriel Christie of the Special Flying Squad.
Jolly good. And today, you are going to teach me and our listeners about...
So
Are we not doing the accents anymore?
No,
I thought we agreed to this before off mic.
I have no memory of that.
Oh.
And
Oh, no.
It's gonna get difficult.
The pills aren't working anymore. What are we going to learn about, Gabe? I'm so excited.
That's the thing I'm supposed to talk about. So I'm going to pull back the curtain. I know you don't like doing this, but yesterday was June 27th, I think.
Yes, June 27th.
Which is a special day. Is that
It was your birthday and I totally forgot. Oh, man, I'm sorry.
not my birthday,
Ooh.
but the birthday of
Our Lord and Savior,
topic.
Jesus Christ.
Our Lord and Savior, Emma Goldman.
Oh, okay.
Which was actually a coincidence. I just wanted to talk about Emma Goldman, but it turned out it was her birthday.
Is that an
yesterday.
anime character?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So she was an anime character. She was also one of the most outspoken anarchists, also a feminist, at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. She was also a champion of women's reproductive rights, which is
What?
somewhat topical.
Well, I mean, it was. They don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we're so far past that, we can just laugh about it, right? It's not too soon.
No, not at all. Yeah, things aren't going great. Goldman spent most of her time traveling around the country, because she tended to end up in jail, because the police and the establishment didn't really like what she was saying. So whenever they caught up to her, they would generally throw her in jail. But from 1908 to 1909, she undertook what was called the Anarchist Roadshow. Then, so she would basically travel city to city, and give speeches, give lectures, hold rallies, agitate, do normal anarchist things.
Yes, anarchy things.
So the Philly police found out that she was coming to Philly in 1909.
And they sent her a edible arrangement.
Yes, they were very excited to have her, and they rolled out the red carpet. But before we get into that, we should talk a little, or we should give some backstory as to who Emma Goldman was, in case people are unfamiliar. And also,
Well, I mean, I thought she was an anime character.
she was, or is. I'm sure there is actually an anime of Emma Goldman. Speaking of, there is an anime about Marx's life, which is not the worst thing.
Oh, okay.
I won't say it's great. It's not terrible. Also, just a very brief content warning that there's going to be a very brief discussion of child abuse and sexual assault.
Oh, no.
So Emma Goldman was born to a poor but fairly devout Jewish family in 1869, on June 27th, 1869,
Okay.
in Lithuania, which was at the time part of the Russian Empire.
Just give it time, it still will be.
Oh, yeah. So growing up, she had a pretty awful family life. Her mother was pretty depressed and distant. And her father was really violent and abusive.
Okay.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that her father's abusiveness probably contributed to her mother's depression.
Yeah, that wouldn't help. I could see that, yeah.
Especially in mid-19th century traditional Jewish families, that was most likely an arranged marriage. So she was not necessarily the best situation there. And then...
Well, I mean, like, God has a plan. And according to this plan, everything is arranged because it's a plan, right?
Clearly.
So, I mean, like, every marriage is arranged.
Yeah. And if you really...
Blessed be him, Lord Jesus Christ.
Yes. Except they're Jewish. But I guess God's plan for Jews is that we have to suffer.
Jesus was Jewish.
And he suffered a lot. But yeah, so Goldman's family life was not happy. She witnessed basically constant abuse because they were forced to live in a Jewish ghetto, I believe in Vilna. And because they were denied access to the better parts of the city. At the time in Russia, there were specific regions that Jews were allowed to live, and then within each city, like, you legally weren't allowed to be outside of that section of the city. Yeah. It was not great. Within the ghetto, she fairly regularly witnessed men sexually assaulting women, landlords attacking peasants and their tenants, Russian officials extorting and terrorizing the citizens, and basically there was just a constant threat of anti-Semitic violence. So, but within this horrific context that she was growing up in, Goldman was being educated, initially at a cheder, which is a...
What?
Cheder. It's a Jewish sort of religious elementary school.
Okay.
Roman high school for Jews. Or no.
Well, I didn't go to Robit, so... But I understand.
Yeah. This would be IHM for Jews.
Okay. Wow. Maybe nobody listeners knows what that is.
Yep. If you live in Roxborough and are Catholic, you probably know what that
Nobody
is.
knows what we're talking about.
But, so initially it was an elementary school, or cheder, in Königsberg, which is the weird little chunk of former Prussia that's now Russia. It's convoluted.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
But near Lithuania. Then at 13, she managed to spend 6 months at a school in St. Petersburg, which was also surprising because St. Petersburg was one of the cities that Jews were barred from entering. So you had to have special permission to be there. Basically, you had to be a student. You had to prove that you had business to be there. And regardless, you had to basically get a visa to be in this city, despite being a citizen of the country. But then she returned from school, and her father got all upset that she was she was educated now. I don't know why he was surprised.
You come back in this house and you're learned? God
Basically,
damn it.
According to Goldman's memoirs, he basically told her that all she has to know as a Jewish wife is how to keep a kosher home and make her husband happy. And that's it. So yeah. So he forbade her from going back to school.
I dare you to go home to your wife and say that.
I value my own life. So instead of sending her to school, he sent her to work in a factory.
Okay.
Oh, I should also mention, because I skipped over this, while she was at the school in St. Petersburg, she met a bunch of radical students. So she was starting to read a little bit of theory.
Okay.
And getting into some fun stuff. He sent her to work in a factory and arranged for her to be married when she was 15. And so this was basically Goldman's first encounter with actually doing the manual labor at the core of industrialized capitalism. And unsurprisingly, that made her more radical because she didn't like it. It's amazing. She and her sister fled to the U.S. in 1885. And initially, both her and her sister were convinced that the U.S. would be like this wonderland and this haven for immigrants where they could come and... Yeah.
Oh, Emma.
Yeah.
Oh, Emma.
And she'd be able to build like a free and liberated life. And she got there and...
it was all true.
Yeah. She lived happily ever after. But yeah, so...
This country respects women.
Mm-hmm.
And immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah, so she saw some of the same issues that she saw in Russia, and was pretty disillusioned. But then after the Haymarket Affair, she started getting really interested in the American anarchist movement. So then over the next 20 years, Goldman continued to learn and advocate for anarchism. She got involved in the labor movement, fought for civil rights, women's rights, especially women's access to birth control.
What year was this?
This was between like the 1890s up to 1909. Gotcha.
Okay.
Took me a second. Yeah. Oh, and she specifically advocated for women's access to birth control and bodily autonomy because she considered that to be an essential part of women's liberation, because you can't really be politically liberated if a man can basically completely change your life by getting you pregnant.
Yeah.
So they've kind of figured this out over 100 years ago, and some people just haven't gotten it yet.
They got it.
Yeah, so all of this advocacy made her a constant target for police. It also got worse after 1901 because President McKinley was assassinated by the anarchist Leon Czolgosz. Goldman also specifically got blamed for because Czolgosz had been at one of her rallies beforehand, and the police were claiming that she like directly told him to do that, and then they also very quickly executed Czolgosz, so he couldn't really say much on the matter.
Oh.
So that wasn't great.
That's wrapped up.
Yeah. So she did get acquitted of that. But so there's an immediate crackdown on anything like even remotely related to anarchism, even more so than there already was. So by the economic downturn of 1908/1909, it was like started in late 1907 into 1908, lasted for a couple years.
Might have touched 1906.
Probably.
Maybe a little bit into 1905.
Yeah. I think for the working class, I think it's fairly safe to say that like
1776.
Yeah.
2022.
It was never great, but it got worse. But Goldman was pretty nationally known, and was pretty much despised by anyone slightly right of center. And 1909 was actually the second time she had tried to speak in Philadelphia. The first was in 1904, but she basically got chased out of the city by the cops. So they didn't even let her like get into the city.
Wow.
To speak. So we'll actually get into the story of her getting into the city to try and speak. At the start of 1908, she was actually in exile in Canada, but in April came across the border, surprisingly without any interference.
Okay.
And this like got reported in all of the papers as being, because everyone knew that she did this.
Yeah.
And it got reported that she had crossed the border, and everyone was just like, but how did that happen? Because she had to go through a border checkpoint, and they were all supposed to stop her, and no one did. and she just walked across.
Okay.
And it was fine.
That's it?
Yeah,
All right. She just...
Like...
Might have been that caravan that came across.
Yeah, she hid in the caravan. She was starting her anarchist roadshow. Or she started her anarchist
roadshow.
Yeah.
9 o'clock on TLC.
And that was pretty specifically to kind of start agitating workers during the economic downturn, to get them organized and basically trying to... I don't necessarily think that her speeches were specifically to advocate for revolution, but she was definitely trying to breed a lot of class consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Well,
some of them were
just the first domino.
Yeah, exactly. She announced that in September 1909 she would speak in Philly at the Odd Fellows Temple, which was at Broad and Cherry, which is now Race Street. The Odd Fellows were like the sort of working class, somewhat lefty answer to the Masons.
Oddfellows Temple does sound like a barber shop quintet that plays death metal, honestly.
That, it's not that far off.
And I would love to hear that album.
Yeah, that should be done. Upon hearing about, or upon learning that she was going to speak in Philly, the assistant superintendent of police was quoted by the Inquirer as saying, "She had better put on a rubber suit if she undertakes to make a speech there, because she certainly will get a ducking. There is nothing more distasteful to anarchists than a stream from a fire engine." So he basically was just like, if she shows up, we're going to hit her with a fire hose.
I thought this was going in a different direction. This guy's got some kinks that he just needs to get out.
He probably does. I mean,
she better wear some rubber.
Yeah.
Because she's going to get a stream. It's like, okay, Chief Constable.
Yeah. This was also, in addition to like all of the anti-anarchist sentiment around McKinley's assassination, in Philly specifically, there was what was called the Broad Street Riot, which was a clash between police and anarchist workers. So the Philly police especially were very just on edge about anything anarchist. So then Goldman's road manager and occasional lover, Dr. Ben Reitman, went to speak with the city's director of public safety, a fellow named Henry Clay, to gauge the city government's attitude towards the lecture series. So Clay informed Reitman that he would never allow Goldman or any other radical to speak publicly under his watch. So undeterred by this, Goldman continued with her plans, and they set a date for September 28th. And she took the train from New York City down to Philly. And this was just a really interesting random note, that the mayor of Philadelphia at the time, John Rayburn, was on the train with her.
Oh, yeah?
And it doesn't seem like he noticed her. He made some comments about there being like a woman with an entourage on the train, and that he thought she might have been a suffragette.
Okay.
But had no idea that this was Emma Goldman, like famous anarchist. But the newspaper, The Public Ledger, did make some very misogynistic comments, basically saying that they were surprised at how attractive she was. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which is like, that's A+ reporting right there. She's like, yes, she's not horribly ugly. And that's all you need to know about this radical anarchist feminist. I'd say we've progressed, but I don't think we have. Do we pull any sources
from this? From the Public Ledger?
I wasn't able to find the Public Ledger article. It doesn't seem to have been digitized. I was really upset about that.
That just opens the Pandora's box. Now we have to go to like National Enquirer for everything now in the Sun.
So Goldman knew that she was gonna probably have to go to the courts to be allowed to speak in Philly.
Yeah.
So she lawyered up, consulting with Henry John Nelson, who was a socialist lawyer in Philly who worked with the Philadelphia chapter of the Free Speech League, which is kind of like a predecessor to the ACLU.
Okay.
The day before her speech, Nelson and Reitman went back to speak with Henry Clay to determine if there was like anything they could do to get him to let her speak.
Yeah.
And he said that if she gave him a detailed copy of her speech that he could edit, then he would let her speak.
Okay. So much for the tolerant right.
Yeah. So he just wanted to censor her, and they weren't really on board with that. And then on the 28th of September, 1909, Goldman walked out of her hotel at Broad and South Penn Square and walked north to the Oddfellows Temple. There was already a large crowd waiting outside, and it sounds like around 20 or so cops were blocking access to the steps.
Okay.
So they were ready for her.
But they were like, damn, she's fine for an anarchist.
Yeah. Yeah, she just winked at them and they all clapped.
You don't look like a she-beast.
So,
and then behind her, the Oddfellow Temple singers were like, oh, 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 it's time to eat babies. It's time to roll them down the hill into the trash compactor to where they go, and we'll fertilize the soil. Hey!
Need to play Christian Baby Blood again. Weirdly, her appearance did actually come into play here, because she was fairly short, and if she could blend into a crowd pretty easily. So basically, she just kind of disappeared into the crowd and then reemerged right in front of the cops and was just going to walk straight past them up into the temple.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, O'Leary, who is the assistant superintendent of police, so Mr. Fire Engine, took her arm.
Hose man.
Took her arm and said, "Here, walk this way," and like tried to brush her off and get her. Basically, he was trying to
get her in a rubber suit.
Yeah, or take her and arrest her away from the crowd, because he knew that if he had arrested her publicly, they would have gotten attacked.
Yeah.
Nelson, her lawyer, tried to intervene, but the other cops pushed him to the curb. And then at this point, the crowd got or started to get angry and was closing in around the cops. And that distracted O'Leary long enough that Goldman and Nelson basically disappeared back into the crowd and just walked over to Nelson's law offices, which were a block away.
All right.
So at this point, there were 5,000 people filling between filling Broad Street between Arch and Cherry. So, which is now Race Street.
Okay.
So 5,000 people crowding into one block of Broad. Yeah. There were 600 people allowed to actually enter the Oddfellows Temple, because they continued with all of the rest of their speakers for the day. Dr. Reitman came and representing Goldman, and basically was just like, she's not going to be able to talk. We're fighting this legally. Here are all of these other speakers. But they did get to listen to like a who's who of Philly radicals at the time.
Yeah, but the main event's not there.
No.
Though. They're going to start throwing shit.
Reitman also publicly declared that they were going to file an injunction against the city, and that he believed Goldman would be speaking publicly by the end of the month.
I hope they refund the tickets, at least.
I actually don't know if the Oddfellows Temple charged. It's possible that they didn't, but I have no idea. It's a good question. So then on the 29th, Nelson requested that injunction against Rayburn, Clay, and O'Leary, basically asking that the courts prevent them from interfering in Goldman speaking in the future. And he was basically making a First Amendment claim. On the 30th, crowds again gathered at the Oddfellows Temple, hoping to hear Goldman, but Reitman said that she had to lay low until the courts responded. Then on October 1st, this is going to end up just being like a play-by-play from now on. So, court proceedings began. Goldman was called as the first witness, where she got to basically sit like 10 feet away from Clay and Rayburn in the witness stand. And she essentially used it as an opportunity to to explain the ideological underpinnings of anarchism.
Okay.
And just like preach to everyone in the courtroom, which was pretty cool.
That's what we got to do.
And then she also finally got to actually explain how ridiculous the claims against her about about McKinley's assassination were.
Yeah.
And that she had basically nothing to do with it. But some of the testimony from Goldman's court proceedings are pretty great. Because the other crazy thing is that she basically got to have an anarchist tirade put into the official record.
Yeah.
So this is now official court documents. So Goldman said, "The people, if properly developed, can take care of themselves. They need no government at such a stage of education and development. The government could then be destroyed and," Judge Wilson then interjected, "even by force?" And Goldman said, "In some future time, yes. When the people are able to take care of themselves, government should be destroyed." So then Goldman was questioned by the defense attorneys from Rayburn and Clay. Both the attorneys from Rayburn and Clay argued that Goldman's past record of arrest and quote-unquote dangerous rhetoric was justification enough to block her from speaking publicly. And that was basically the end of the initial court proceedings. They went back to her, the headquarters that she had set up at 1502 Arch Street, which was, if I remember correctly, basically an anarchist hostel. And while she was there, she worked on her defense and like planning her next moves and everything, but then also received visitors from around the city.
Okay.
And so she got people from like the libertarian radical movement, anarchists, university students, and then she also got like whole delegations of factory workers that would come to talk to her. And one of the journalists from, I think this was from the Ledger again, was surprised to find that many of the younger factory girls that were coming to talk to her were actually quite intelligent and were quoting Thoreau and Tolstoy. There was also one incredibly misogynistic letter to the Evening Public Ledger. The argument was basically that Goldman is just some foolish woman, and if the cops would just shut up and let her speak, there wouldn't be near as much fuss, and she'd have a smaller platform. So he was basically, and like, he was probably right about the cops giving her a larger platform.
Yeah.
But his reasoning before that was, So a week passed without any resolution. So this is October 7th. So then the Free Speech League held a protest at the Labor Lyceum at 6th and Brown Street. Which I have to figure out where Brown Street was. I think it's probably under the Vine Street Expressway right now, or would have been over Vine Street. So the chairman of the Free Speech League, a fellow named Leonard Abbott, invited Mayor Rayburn to attend and explain why he wouldn't let Goldman speak.
Okay.
Instead, Rayburn declined, and in his place sent a police captain, 4 lieutenants, and 50 beat cops.
All right.
And they just stood menacingly at the back of the crowd.
Oh. All right.
And so that was Rayburn's explanation as to why Goldman wasn't allowed to speak. What ended up happening was Rayburn and Clay were building a case that they weren't violating Emma Goldman's First Amendment rights because there was dispute as to whether or not she was a citizen, which would determine whether or not the First Amendment applied to her.
Okay.
This gets really freaking screwy and complicated. The judge revealed, because they called her back, or they called her lawyers back to have further discussions. And in these new discussions, the judge revealed that as of April 8th, 1909, Goldman was not a U.S. citizen.
Uh-oh.
Which only happened because U.S. officials harassed the friends and family of Goldman's ex-husband, Jacob Kirshner, to testify that he hadn't been in the country for 5 years when he was granted citizenship in 1884. So what's happening here is Goldman came to the country in 1885. I think in 87, she got married to Kirshner.
Okay. 2 years later, she gets married.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when she got married to him, he was a naturalized citizen. So she got citizenship through that marriage.
Yeah. Then they divorced.
But she kept citizenship. But her citizenship was tied to whether or not he was actually a citizen. So they claimed that his initial citizenship was fraudulent.
Really?
Yeah. Because they basically, coerced a confession out of his friends. They annulled his citizenship, which thus annulled hers.
Jesus Christ.
And neither of them were ever informed that there was an investigation or that this happened. So both her and Kirshner lost their citizenship, and no one ever thought to fucking tell them. And she used her passport as identification after that, and nothing got flagged about it. They were just waiting to get her arrested so they could deport her. So Nelson had to submit a new appeal, rather basing it not on the First Amendment, but there had been standing precedent for letting non-citizens publicly speak in both PA and Philly.
Okay.
So he was basically saying, you've let all of these other immigrants speak.
Yeah.
Why aren't you letting her speak? I'd also say that, we wouldn't be a fucking country right now if you didn't let people like Thomas Paine, who was a labor radical and an immigrant, speak publicly.
I mean,
but
everybody is technically an immigrant.
Yeah.
I mean, we all came from immigrants, so
Yeah. So only members of the Lenape tribe are allowed to speak publicly in Philadelphia, because everyone else is an immigrant.
If you want to,
So
I would just keep going back. Keep going back until you're a microscopic organism in the primordial ooze.
There you go.
When does life begin? When you're a microscopic organism in the primordial ooze. That's when life begins.
We're all just protein chains. So on October 15th, 1909, the court ruled in Goldman versus Rayburn that the police had every right to prevent a foreign national from speaking publicly. Goldman left Philly later in 1909, but continued her anarchist roadshow, and then began campaigning even harder for free speech, which became especially important during World War I, where basically anyone who was even remotely opposed to the war was getting arrested. So there was a big First Amendment fight over that. I just fell down this rabbit hole of Emma Goldman trying to speak in Philly and the crazy shenanigans that they pulled to not let her do that.
This whole story could have taken place literally 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Literally 3 days ago.
Yep.
Protesting against an unjust war, women's rights, women's bodily autonomy, birth control.
Yep.
All this shit. Getting put in a rubber suit and urinated on. This could have been 3 days ago.
Yeah.
This could have been 3 days ago. This was my 3 days ago.
Ooh. Well, that was consensual, though. So.
Very true.
It's also.
Well, on your part, it was.
Well, so, yeah, that was Emma Goldman attempting to speak in Philly in 1909. I figured that was a very topical episode.
Pertinent, yes.
I'm just going to say...
okay, go ahead.
I hope that it is no longer relevant by the time it airs.
Okay.
Is my hope.
This happened 113 years ago?
Yeah.
113 years ago. And you think this is not going to be relevant 2 weeks from now when this episode drops, Gabe? I admire your optimism, sir.